I never thought my life would change so drastically on a crisp autumn morning in Spokane. There I was, Natalie Murphy, 38 years old and barely keeping my equestrian center afloat. The financial pressure was mounting, and I could feel the weight of it all on my shoulders as I mucked out stalls. Damn economy, I muttered, wiping sweat from my brow. My brunette hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and I knew I looked a far cry from the polished businesswoman I'd once aspired to be. That's when I saw her, Bridget Simmons, though I didn't know her name then. She strode into the barn like she owned the place, all confidence and grace. Blonde hair cascaded over her shoulders, and even from a distance, I could see the intensity in her blue eyes. "I'm here for my first lesson," she announced, her voice carrying an authority that made me stand a little straighter. I quickly put on my best professional smile. "Of course. You must be Miss Simmons. I'm Natalie, the owner. Let's get you set up." As I helped her choose a helmet and led her to the practice ring, I couldn't help but notice how she carried herself. There was something about her posture, the way she held her chin high, that spoke of boardrooms and power lunches rather than hay and horseshoes. "Have you ridden before?" I asked, leading out a gentle mare named Whisper. Bridget shook her head. "First time. Thought I'd try something new." I nodded, admiring her willingness to step out of what I assumed was a very comfortable comfort zone. As I helped her mount, I felt a jolt when our hands touched. I brushed it off as static electricity, but part of me knew better. The lesson went smoothly until it didn't. Whisper, usually calm as could be, spooked at a fluttering plastic bag caught on the fence. Bridget, caught off guard, tumbled from the saddle with a yelp. My heart leapt into my throat as I rushed to her side. "Gosh, are you all right?" I knelt beside her, hands hovering, unsure where to touch. Bridget winced, sitting up slowly. "I think so, just my pride that's bruised." I helped her to her feet, noticing a small cut on her arm. "Let's get that cleaned up. I've got a first aid kit in the office." As we walked to the small cluttered space I called an office, I couldn't help but feel a mix of guilt and something else, something that made my pulse quicken as I dabbed antiseptic on her wound. "I'm so sorry about this," I said, focusing intently on the task at hand to avoid meeting her gaze. "Whisper's never done that before." Bridget chuckled softly. "Well, I suppose it's not a proper equestrian experience without a little excitement." I looked up then, caught off guard by her good humor. Our eyes met, and for a moment, the world seemed to still. I cleared my throat, breaking the spell. "You're taking this remarkably well." She shrugged, a smile playing at her lips. "Life's too short to sweat the small stuff. Besides, I got a pretty good story out of it, and—" She paused, her gaze flickering over me. "The company isn't bad either." I felt heat rise to my cheeks and busied myself with putting away the first aid supplies. "Well, I'm glad you're okay. Maybe we can try again next week." "On the house, of course." Bridget stood, smoothing out her riding pants. "I'd like that. Same time?" I nodded, walking her to the door. As she left, I couldn't help but watch her go, admiring the confident sway of her hips. It wasn't until she'd driven away that I realized I'd been holding my breath. Shaking my head, I turned back to the barn. I had a business to run after all, but as I went about my day, I found my thoughts repeatedly drifting to blonde hair and blue eyes, and the way my skin had tingled at her touch. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would change everything. The weeks that followed our first tumultuous meeting settled into a rhythm. Every Wednesday afternoon, like clockwork, Bridget would arrive for her lesson. I found myself looking forward to these sessions more than I cared to admit. As autumn deepened, painting Spokane in vibrant reds and golds, I watched Bridget's confidence in the saddle grow. She was a natural, her body language becoming more fluid with each passing week. I couldn't help but admire the way she commanded Whisper's attention, much like she commanded mine. "You're a quick study," I commented one crisp afternoon, as she expertly guided Whisper through a series of turns. Bridget flashed me a smile that made my heart skip. "I've got a good teacher." Our eyes met, and I felt that now familiar spark of electricity. I cleared my throat, breaking the moment. "So, what do you do when you're not mastering the art of horseback riding?" She laughed, a rich sound that sent warmth spreading through my chest. "I wrangle a different kind of beast. I'm a corporate lawyer." I raised an eyebrow, impressed. "That explains the power suits I've seen you arrive in." "Guilty as charged," she grinned, dismounting with newfound grace. "Though I have to say I'm starting to prefer these riding pants." I tried not to let my gaze linger on said pants as we led Whisper back to the stables. Well, you wear them well, I said, immediately regretting how flirtatious it sounded. If Bridget noticed, she didn't let on. Instead, she launched into a story about a particularly challenging case she was working on. I found myself captivated by her passion, the way her eyes lit up as she spoke. As we groomed Whisper together, our hands occasionally brushing, I realized how comfortable this had become. The initial awkwardness had faded, replaced by an easy camaraderie that felt dangerous. Weeks turned into months, and our Wednesday lessons became the highlight of my week. I found myself sharing more about the struggles of running the equestrian center, and Bridget listened with genuine interest, occasionally offering legal advice that proved invaluable. One particularly blustery evening, rain lashing against the stable windows, I suggested we cut the lesson short. This weather's not fit for man nor beast, I joked, leading Whisper back to her stall. Bridget nodded, shaking water from her hair. Shame to waste the evening, though. Got any wine stashed in that office of yours? I hesitated for a moment, aware of the line we were towing, but the thought of Bridget leaving so soon made my chest ache. As a matter of fact, I do. We huddled in my cramped office, the rain providing a soothing backdrop to our conversation. One glass of wine turned into two, and I found myself opening up about my past relationships, the failures that had led me to pour everything into this place. It's not easy, is it? Bridget mused, her blue eyes soft in the dim light. Balancing career and personal life. I shook my head, acutely aware of how close we were sitting. No, it's not, but this place, it's worth it. I can see that, she said softly. Her hand found mine on the desk and I felt my breath catch. You've built something beautiful here, Natalie. The way she said my name sent shivers down my spine. I looked up, meeting her gaze, and saw something there that both thrilled and terrified me. Bridget leaned in slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. I think I'm building something beautiful here too. My heart raced as I understood her meaning. This was it, the moment where everything could change. I found myself leaning in as well, drawn by an invisible force. Just then, a loud clap of thunder made us both jump, breaking the spell. I pulled back, laughing nervously. Guess that's nature's way of saying it's time to call it a night. Bridget nodded, a mix of disappointment and understanding in her eyes. As I walked her to her car, sheltering her with an umbrella, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd crossed some invisible line. Same time next week? She asked, pausing by her car door. I nodded, not trusting my voice. As she drove away, I stood in the rain, letting it cool my flushed cheeks. What was I doing? Bridget was a client, successful and probably straight. And yet, I went to bed that night with my head spinning, replaying every moment, every touch. Little did I know, our dance was just beginning, and the music was about to get a lot more complicated. The tension that had been building between Bridget and me became almost palpable in the weeks following our rain-soaked evening. Our Wednesday lesson stretched longer, neither of us eager to part ways when the hour was up. I found myself making excuses to extend our time together, suggesting cool-down rides or offering to show her new trails. One crisp evening, as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, I proposed a sunset trail ride. Bridget's eyes lit up at the suggestion, and I felt a flutter in my chest at her enthusiasm. As we rode side by side, the silence between us was comfortable, punctuated only by the soft thud of hooves on the forest floor and the occasional whinny from our mounts. I stole glances at Bridget, admiring the way the fading sunlight caught in her blonde hair, giving her an almost ethereal glow. You know, Bridget said, breaking the silence, I never thought I'd enjoy something like this so much. I raised an eyebrow. Horseback riding? She chuckled, shaking her head. Well, yes, that too. But I meant this. She gestured vaguely between us. Spending time like this, away from the bustle of the city, the pressure of work. It's liberating. I nodded, understanding all too well. It's why I love it out here. It's like the rest of the world fades away. We reached a clearing that overlooked the valley, the city of Spokane twinkling in the distance as twilight settled in. I dismounted, helping Bridget down from her horse. Our hands lingered together a moment longer than necessary, and I felt that familiar spark of electricity. It's beautiful, Bridget breathed, taking in the view. Yeah, I agreed, though my eyes were fixed on her rather than the landscape. She turned, catching me staring. and a slow smile spread across her face. "Natalie," she said softly, stepping closer, "I think we need to talk about this thing between us." My heart raced as I nodded. "I know, I've been trying to ignore it, but it's getting harder," she finished for me. I swallowed hard, gathering my courage. "Bridget, I need to know, have you ever been with a woman before?" She shook her head, her blue eyes never leaving mine. "No. But I've never felt this way about anyone before, man or woman." The admission hung in the air between us, charged with possibility. I took a deep breath, deciding to lay it all out. "I have been with women, I mean. And I'm very attracted to you, Bridget. But you're a client, and I don't want to complicate things if—" My words were cut off as Bridget closed the distance between us, her lips meeting mine in a kiss that sent shockwaves through my entire body. For a moment I was too stunned to respond. But then I melted into it, my hands finding her waist as hers tangled in my hair. When we finally parted, both breathless, I couldn't help but laugh softly. "Well, that certainly complicates things." Bridget grinned, her forehead resting against mine. "I think I'm okay with complicated." We stayed in that clearing until the stars came out, talking about our pasts, our fears, and this new, exciting territory we were venturing into. As we rode back to the stables, I felt lighter than I had in years, despite the weight of uncertainty that still lingered. The following weeks were a whirlwind of stolen kisses in the stables, long talks over wine in my office, and trail rides that often ended with us wrapped in each other's arms. We agreed to keep things discreet, both for the sake of my business and Bridget's career. But as with most secrets, it was only a matter of time before the world started to catch on. It happened on a sunny Saturday afternoon. I had convinced Bridget to join me for lunch at a quaint little restaurant in downtown Spokane. A rare outing for us outside of the equestrian center. We were seated at a cozy table near the window, laughing over some shared joke when I spotted her, my sister Sarah, walking down the street. I froze mid-laugh as our eyes met through the glass. Sarah's gaze flickered between me and Bridget, her eyebrows rising as she took in our clasped hands on the table. I quickly pulled my hand away, but it was too late. The look of surprise and realization on Sarah's face told me everything I needed to know. "Natalie, what's wrong?" Bridget asked, concern evident in her voice. I forced a smile, trying to calm my racing heart. "Nothing, I saw my sister outside. I think she saw us." Bridget's eyes widened slightly, but she remained calm. "Okay, what do you want to do?" I took a deep breath, weighing my options. Part of me wanted to run out and explain everything to Sarah before she jumped to conclusions. Another part wanted to pretend I hadn't seen her at all. In the end, I did neither. I simply squeezed Bridget's hand, drawing strength from her presence. "We'll deal with it," I said, more confidently than I felt. "Together." As we finished our meal, I couldn't shake the feeling that a storm was brewing on the horizon. But with Bridget by my side, I felt ready to face whatever came our way. Little did I know, the challenges ahead would test not only our budding relationship, but every aspect of our lives. The aftermath of Sarah's discovery was like the calm before a storm. For days I waited for the inevitable phone call, the confrontation, but it never came. The silence was almost worse than any argument I could imagine. Meanwhile, Bridget and I continued our delicate dance, stolen moments becoming more precious as the weight of our secret grew heavier. One evening, as we sat in my office sharing a bottle of wine, Bridget's phone buzzed incessantly. "Everything okay?" I asked, noticing the furrow in her brow as she scrolled through her messages. She sighed, setting the phone down. "Just office gossip, it's nothing." But I could see in her eyes that it wasn't nothing. "Bridget," I said softly, reaching for her hand. "Talk to me?" She met my gaze, conflict clear in her blue eyes. "Someone at the firm saw us together last weekend, at that little cafe downtown." My heart sank. And now there are questions, rumors. She ran a hand through her blonde hair, a gesture I'd come to recognize as a sign of stress. "It's not a big deal really, it's just—" "It could affect your partnership track," I finished for her. Bridget nodded, squeezing my hand. "But, hey, it's just gossip, it'll blow over." I wanted to believe her, but a knot of worry had formed in my stomach. As if the universe was conspiring against us, my phone chose that moment to light up with a text from Sarah. "Family dinner this Sunday. No excuses. We need to talk." I showed Bridget the message, my hand trembling slightly. Looks like the other shoe is about to drop. She pulled me into a hug, her warmth comforting despite the circumstances. Whatever happens, we're in this together, okay? I nodded against her shoulder, drawing strength from her presence. As we parted, our lips met in a kiss that felt both reassuring and desperate. The days leading up to Sunday were a blur of anxiety and stolen moments with Bridget. When the day finally arrived, I found myself standing on my parents' porch, heart pounding as if I was a teenager again, caught breaking curfew. The door swung open, revealing my mother's smiling face. "Natalie, come in, come in. Everyone's waiting." Everyone. The word echoed ominously in my mind as I stepped into the house. In the living room I found my father's Sarah, and to my surprise my brother Mike, who I thought was still stationed overseas. "Surprise," Mike grinned, pulling me into a bear hug. "Thought I'd drop in for a visit." As we settled around the dinner table, the conversation remained superficial, the tension palpable beneath the forced normalcy. It wasn't until dessert that Sarah finally broke. "So Natalie," she said, her voice overly casual, "who was that woman I saw you with last weekend?" The room fell silent. I could feel all eyes on me, my cheeks burning under their collective gaze. This was it, the moment of truth. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "Her name is Bridget. She's my girlfriend." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. My mother's fork clattered against her plate, the sound startlingly loud in the silence. "Girlfriend?" my father repeated, his brow furrowed. As in we're in a relationship," I finished, my voice stronger than I felt. "I'm gay. I've known for a long time, but I've been afraid to tell you." The silence that followed was excruciating. I braced myself for the worst: anger, disappointment, rejection. What I didn't expect was my mother's quiet question. "Are you happy, sweetie?" I blinked, taken aback. Yes, I am." She nodded, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "Then that's all that matters." The tension in the room seemed to deflate. My father cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable but not angry. "Well, I can't say I understand it, but you're our daughter. We love you no matter what." Sarah, to my surprise, looked more relieved than anything. "Gosh, I thought you were going to say you were sick or in trouble or something." Mike chuckled, shaking his head. "Sis, I've known you were gay since high school. Remember Jenny from the soccer team?" I felt a wave of emotion wash over me. Relief, joy, disbelief. Tears pricked at my eyes as I looked around at my family, seeing not rejection, but love and acceptance. As the evening wound down, hugs were exchanged, and promises were made to introduce Bridget to the family soon. Driving home, I felt lighter than I had in years, as if a weight I'd been carrying for so long had finally been lifted. The moment I got home, I called Bridget, eager to share the news. As I recounted the evening's events, I could hear the smile in her voice. "I'm so happy for you, Natalie," she said warmly. "I wish I could be there to celebrate with you." "Me too," I replied, a hint of worry creeping back in. "How are things at the office?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "It's complicated, but let's not worry about that now. This is your moment." As we said our goodnights, I couldn't shake the feeling that while one storm had passed, another was brewing on the horizon. But for now, basking in the afterglow of acceptance, I allowed myself to hope that whatever challenges lay ahead, Bridget and I would face them together. The weeks following my coming out to my family were a whirlwind of emotions. The relief of acceptance was tempered by a growing unease about Bridget's situation at work. She'd been increasingly evasive about the office gossip, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was shielding me from something. It all came to a head one crisp autumn morning. I was in the stables, mucking out stalls, when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Bridget's sleek car pulled up, and she stepped out, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. "Bridget," I called out, setting aside my pitchfork. "What are you doing here? I thought you had a big meeting today." She strode towards me, her blue eyes stormy. "The meeting's why I'm here. Natalie, I need your help." We retreated to my office, where Bridget explained the situation. A rival firm was trying to poach one of our biggest clients, citing a property dispute that threatened the expansion of my equestrian center. "They're using our relationship as leverage," Bridget said, pacing the small space, implying that I can't be objective because of my personal involvement. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Gosh, Bridget, I'm so sorry. I never meant to complicate things for you. She stopped pacing, taking my hands in hers. Hey, no, this isn't your fault, but I need to know everything about this property dispute. If we can resolve it quickly, we can undercut their whole argument. For the next few hours, we pored over documents, maps, and old contracts. As it turned out, the dispute hinged on an outdated easement that had never been properly recorded. With Bridget's legal expertise and my knowledge of the land, we crafted a solution that would satisfy all parties. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the stable yard, Bridget leaned back in her chair with a triumphant smile. I think we've got it. This could work, Natalie. This could really work. The relief in her voice was palpable, and I felt a surge of admiration for her determination. Without thinking, I leaned in and kissed her, pouring all my emotions into the gesture. When we parted, both slightly breathless, Bridget's eyes were shining. What was that for? She asked, a smile playing at her lips. For being you, I replied simply. For fighting for us, for your career, for everything. She pulled me close, resting her forehead against mine. We make a good team, you know. The moment was interrupted by a knock at the office door. We sprang apart, old habits die hard, as one of my staff poked her head in. Sorry to interrupt, Natalie, but there's someone here to see you. Says it's about a property matter. Bridget and I exchanged glances before following my employee out to the yard. A man in an expensive suit stood there, looking out of place among the hay and horses. Ms. Murphy? He inquired, extending his hand. I'm Robert Callahan, representing Westbrook Development. I believe we have some matters to discuss. I shook his hand, feeling Bridget tense beside me. Mr. Callahan, this is fortuitous. My legal counsel and I were just reviewing the situation. Perhaps we could all sit down and talk. The next hour was a flurry of negotiations, with Bridget expertly leading the discussion. I watched in awe as she deftly maneuvered through legal jargon, presenting our solution with confidence and clarity. By the time Mr. Callahan left, we had a tentative agreement that would allow for both the expansion of my center and Westbrook's development plans. As his car disappeared down the driveway, Bridget turned to me with a grin. I think we just saved your business and my career in one fell swoop. The elation of the moment swept over us, and I pulled her into a fierce embrace. We stood there, holding each other, as the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in brilliant hues. You were amazing, I murmured into her hair. She pulled back slightly, her blue eyes meeting mine. We were amazing, together. The intensity of her gaze sent a shiver down my spine. Without a word, we both knew where this was heading. We barely made it back to my small apartment above the stables before clothes started coming off. What followed was a night of passion and tenderness, of exploration and affirmation. As we lay tangled in sheets afterward, Bridget trailing lazy patterns on my skin, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. You know, Bridget said softly, I've been thinking about taking some time off, maybe a long weekend away, just the two of us. I propped myself up on an elbow, studying her face in the moonlight streaming through the window. Really? What about work? She smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. After today, I think I've earned it. Besides, I want to spend some time with my girlfriend without having to look over our shoulders. The word girlfriend sent a thrill through me. It was still new, still exciting. I'd love that, I replied, leaning in for a kiss. As we drifted off to sleep, I couldn't help but feel that we'd turned a corner. The road ahead still held challenges, I was sure, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face them head on. Little did I know, our weekend getaway would bring its own set of surprises and revelations, testing the strength of our newfound relationship in ways we couldn't have anticipated. The crisp mountain air filled my lungs as I stepped out onto the cabin's porch, a steaming mug of coffee in hand. The sun was just peeking over the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of pink and orange. Beside me, Bridget stirred, her blonde hair tousled from sleep. Morning, beautiful, I murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. She hummed contentedly, snuggling closer. I could get used to this. Our weekend getaway had stretched into a full week, both of us reluctant to return to the real world. Here, nestled in the mountains, it felt like we were the only two people in existence. As we watched the sunrise, I couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed in such a short time. The property dispute was resolved, my business was thriving, and for the first time in years I felt truly happy. Penny, for your thoughts? Bridget asked, breaking my reverie. I turned to her, taking in the softness of her features in the morning light. Just thinking about how lucky I am. She smiled, that radiant smile that never failed to make my heart skip a beat. We're both lucky. We spent the morning hiking, enjoying the vibrant fall colors and each other's company. As we reached a scenic overlook, Bridget's phone buzzed. She frowned, pulling it out. Everything okay? I asked, noting the furrow in her brow. She nodded, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. Just work. The senior partners want to meet as soon as we get back. I felt a twinge of worry. Is it about the Westbrook case? I'm not sure, she replied, pocketing her phone. But let's not let it ruin our last day here. We made our way back to the cabin, the mood slightly dampened. As we packed our bags, I couldn't shake the feeling that our bubble was about to burst. The drive back to Spokane was quiet, both of us lost in thought. As we pulled up to my place, Bridget turned to me, her blue eyes serious. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that these past few months have been the happiest of my life. I leaned in, kissing her softly. Mine too. The next morning I busied myself at the stables trying not to watch the clock. Bridget had promised to call as soon as her meeting was over. When my phone finally rang, I nearly dropped the saddle I was carrying. Hey, I answered, my heart racing. How did it go? There was a pause, and for a moment, I feared the worst. Then Bridget's voice came through, tinged with disbelief and joy. They're making me partner. I let out a whoop that startled the horses. Bridget, that's amazing, but I thought, with all the gossip and everything. Turns out, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice, my personal involvement in the Westbrook case was seen as an asset. The senior partners were impressed by how I handled it. They said it showed initiative and a unique perspective. Relief and happiness washed over me. I'm so proud of you, babe. This calls for a celebration. Actually, Bridget said, her tone turning mischievous, the partners want to meet you. They're throwing a little party tonight to announce my promotion. Will you be my date? I hesitated for a moment. This would mean stepping fully into Bridget's world, making our relationship public in a way we hadn't before, but the thought of hiding what we had felt wrong. I'd be honored, I replied. That evening, I found myself standing in front of my closet, fretting over what to wear. I settled on a simple black dress, elegant but not too flashy. As I put the finishing touches on my makeup, there was a knock at the door. Bridget stood there looking stunning in a tailored suit. Her eyes widened as she took me in. Wow, you look incredible. I felt a blush creep up my cheeks. You're not so bad yourself, partner. The law firm's office was intimidating, all sleek lines and modern art. As we stepped off the elevator, Bridget squeezed my hand reassuringly. Ready? I nodded, taking a deep breath. Ready? The party was in full swing when we entered. Heads turned as Bridget led me through the crowd, introducing me to her colleagues. To my surprise, most seemed genuinely welcoming. So you're the famous Natalie, one of the senior partners said, shaking my hand. Bridget's told us all about you and your equestrian center. Impressive work with the Westbrook situation. As the night wore on, I found myself relaxing. These people weren't the stuffy lawyers I'd imagined. They were just people, celebrating one of their own. The highlight of the evening came when the managing partner called for everyone's attention. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to announce our newest partner, Bridget Simmons. The room erupted in applause. Bridget, beaming, pulled me close as she accepted congratulations. In that moment, surrounded by her colleagues, with her arm around my waist, I felt a sense of belonging I'd never experienced before. As the party wound down, Bridget and I found ourselves on the office balcony, the city lights twinkling below us. Thank you for being here tonight, Bridget said softly, turning to face me. It means more than you know. I cupped her face in my hands, overcome with emotion. I wouldn't have missed it for the world. Our lips met in a kiss that felt like a promise. As we parted, I saw a future stretching out before us, full of possibility. Little did we know, that future would bring challenges we couldn't have anticipated. But in that moment, on that balcony, with the woman I loved, anything seemed possible. The weeks following Bridget's promotion were a whirlwind of activity. Between her increased workload and my expanding business, we barely had time to catch our breath. But somehow, in the midst of it all, we managed to carve out moments just for us. It was during one of these stolen moments, as we sat on my porch watching the sunset, that my phone buzzed with a text from my sister Sarah. Hey sis. Surprise party for you and Bridget this Saturday. No excuses. I showed the message to Bridget, a mixture of excitement and nervousness bubbling in my chest. Looks like my family wants to officially welcome you to the fold. Bridget's eyes widened slightly. All of them? At once? I chuckled, squeezing her hand. Don't worry, they don't bite much. As Saturday approached, I could sense Bridget's anxiety growing. The night before the party, as we lay in bed, she turned to me, her blue eyes serious in the dim light. What if they don't like me, Natalie? What if they think I'm not good enough for you? I propped myself up on one elbow, looking down at her. Hey, where's this coming from? They're going to love you. She sighed, running a hand through her blonde hair. It's just, I've never done this before. The whole meet the family thing, not with a woman anyway. I leaned down, pressing a soft kiss to her lips. You've faced down corporate sharks and won. My family will be a piece of cake in comparison. The next day, as we pulled up to my parents' house, I could feel the tension radiating off Bridget. I gave her hand a reassuring squeeze before we stepped out of the car. The moment we walked through the door, we were engulfed in a sea of hugs and congratulations. My mother pulled Bridget into a warm embrace, while my father clapped me on the back. About time you brought her around, he said with a wink. As the evening progressed, I watched with joy as Bridget slowly relaxed, her natural charm winning over my family. She swapped legal stories with my brother Mike, discussed horse breeds with my father, and even helped my mother in the kitchen. It wasn't until Sarah cornered me by the punch bowl that I realized not everyone was as thrilled as they seemed. So, she said, her voice low. This is really serious, huh? I nodded, unable to keep the smile off my face. Yeah, it is. Why, is that a problem? Sarah sighed, glancing over to where Bridget was laughing with our cousins. It's a big change, Nat. Are you sure about this, about her? I felt a flare of defensiveness. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, Sarah. Bridget makes me happy. Isn't that what matters? Before Sarah could respond, we were interrupted by the sound of glass shattering. We turned to see Bridget standing in the middle of the room, a broken wine glass at her feet and a look of shock on her face. I'm so sorry, she stammered, bending to pick up the pieces. I rushed over, gently pulling her hands away from the sharp glass. Hey, it's okay, accidents happen. As I cleaned up the mess, I could hear Bridget talking in hushed tones with someone. When I looked up, I saw her on her phone, her brow furrowed in concern. Everything all right? I asked as she hung up. She nodded, but I could see the worry in her eyes. That was my daughter, Emma. She's having some trouble at school, and wants to come stay with me for a while. I blinked, taken aback. In all our months together, Bridget had mentioned her daughter from her previous marriage only in passing. Of course, I said, recovering quickly. When does she want to come? Next week, Bridget replied, biting her lip. I'm sorry, I should have told you about her sooner. It's complicated. I took her hand, ignoring the curious glances from my family. Hey, we'll figure it out together, okay? The rest of the party passed in a blur, my mind whirling with this new development. As we said our goodbyes, I could sense a shift in the air, a new chapter unfolding before us. The drive home was quiet, both of us lost in thought. It wasn't until we were back at my place, curled up on the couch, that Bridget broke the silence. I'm sorry I didn't tell you more about Emma before, she said softly. After the divorce, things were difficult. She's been living with her father, but lately, she's been struggling. I pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. You don't have to apologize. We all have complicated pasts. I'm just glad you trust me enough to share this with me now. Bridget looked up at me, her blue eyes shimmering with unshed tears. You're amazing, you know that? Most people would be running for the hills right about now. I chuckled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Well, I'm not most people. And neither are you. We'll face this together, just like everything else. As we drifted off to sleep that night, I couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and trepidation about the coming week. Meeting Bridget's daughter was a big step, one that would undoubtedly change the dynamic of our relationship. But as I lay there, listening to Bridget's steady breathing, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we'd face them side by side. Because that's what partners do. And Bridget, with all her complexities and surprises, was definitely my partner in every sense of the word. Little did I know, Emma's arrival would test our relationship in ways we never could have anticipated, forcing us to confront our deepest fears and strongest desires. But, in that moment, on the cusp of this new adventure, all I felt was love, and a readiness to embrace whatever came our way. The week leading up to Emma's arrival was a flurry of activity. Bridget threw herself into preparing her spare room while I found myself nervously Googling how to bond with your girlfriend's teenage daughter. As the day approached, I could feel the tension building in both of us. When Emma finally arrived, she was nothing like I'd imagined. At 16, she was a striking mix of Bridget's elegance and a rebellious edge all her own. Her blonde hair was streaked with purple, and her blue eyes, so like her mother's, held a wary defiance. "So," she said, eyeing me critically after the initial awkward introductions. "You're the horse lady." I chuckled, trying to ease the tension. "That's me. Though I prefer equestrian center owner on my business cards." Emma's lips twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile, and I counted it as a small victory. The next few weeks were a delicate balancing act. Bridget was determined to make up for lost time with Emma, while also proving herself at work. I found myself acting as a buffer, trying to bridge the gap between mother and daughter. It was during one of our trail rides, an activity I'd suggested to help Emma settle in, that I finally felt a breakthrough. As we rode side by side, the autumn leaves crunching under our horses' hooves, Emma opened up. "You know," she said, her eyes fixed on the path ahead, "I didn't want to like you." I raised an eyebrow, keeping my tone light. "Oh? And how's that working out for you?" She snorted, a sound so like Bridget's that it made my heart ache. "You're annoyingly likable, it's frustrating." We shared a laugh, and for the first time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, this could work. As autumn faded into winter, we settled into a routine. Family dinners, weekend rides, movie nights where Emma introduced us to her favorite indie films. It wasn't always smooth sailing. There were arguments, slammed doors, and tense silences. But underneath it all, I could feel a family taking shape. It was on a crisp December morning, as I was mucking out stalls, that I got the call that would change everything. Bridget's voice on the other end was tight with excitement. "Natalie, you need to come to the office, now." An hour later, I found myself standing in Bridget's sleek corner office, trying to make sense of the papers she'd thrust into my hands. "It's a proposal," she explained, her eyes shining. "The firm wants to expand its pro bono work, focusing on LGBTQ rights, and they want to partner with local businesses to create inclusive spaces." I looked up from the papers, my heart racing. "And you want the Equestrian Center to be part of this?" Bridget nodded, taking my hands in hers. "I want us to be part of this, together. What do you think?" The implications were staggering. This could mean national recognition, a chance to make a real difference. But it would also mean more scrutiny, more pressure. "I think," I said slowly, "that we need to talk to Emma about this." Bridget's face softened. "You're right. This affects all of us." That evening, over a dinner of takeout Chinese, we laid out the proposal to Emma. To our surprise, she was immediately on board. "Are you kidding?" she said, her eyes wide. "This is awesome. I could help organize youth events, maybe start a GSA at the stables." As Emma rattled off ideas, I caught Bridget's eye across the table. The love and pride I saw there nearly took my breath away. The next few months were a whirlwind of planning and preparation. We hosted our first LGBTQ-friendly horse show, with Emma proudly leading the organizing committee. Bridget became the face of her firm's new initiative, speaking at conferences and rallies. And me? I found myself thrust into a spotlight I'd never imagined, but one I was surprisingly ready for. It was on a warm spring morning, almost a year to the day since Bridget had first walked into my stables, that I made a decision. As we stood together on our favorite trail, watching the sunrise paint the sky in brilliant hues, I turned to her. "Bridget," I said, my heart pounding, "I have something to ask you." She looked at me, her blue eyes curious. "What is it?" I took a deep breath, dropping to one knee. "I had this whole speech planned about how you've changed my life, how you and Emma have become my family, but the truth is, it all comes down to this. I love you. Will you marry me?" For a moment, Bridget just stared at me, her mouth open in shock. Then, to my surprise, she burst out laughing. "I can't believe this," she said, reaching into her jacket pocket. I was going to propose to you. And there in her hand was a ring box identical to the one I held. We stood there, on that sunlit trail, laughing and crying and kissing, 2 rings glinting in the morning light. When we finally calmed down, Bridget cupped my face in her hands. Yes, she said simply. 1,000 times yes. As we rode back to the stables, hands intertwined, I marveled at the journey that had brought us here. From that first tumultuous meeting to this moment of perfect joy, it had been a ride I never could have anticipated. Emma was waiting for us at the stables, a knowing grin on her face. Finally, she exclaimed as we approached, I was beginning to think I'd have to propose for both of you. As we embraced, the 3 of us laughing and crying together, I realized that this messy, complicated, beautiful love was everything I'd ever wanted and more. The road ahead would undoubtedly have its challenges. We still had a lot to figure out: wedding plans, living arrangements, balancing our growing public roles with our private lives. But standing there, with Bridget and Emma, I knew we could face anything. Because sometimes, love isn't about riding off into the sunset. Sometimes it's about saddling up each day, ready to face whatever adventures and challenges come your way. And as I looked at my fiancé and soon-to-be stepdaughter, I knew that this was just the beginning of our greatest adventure yet.